All right, we're here to talk about the unified report schema and how we can move forward. So we've got a POC that was delivered to us by James Johnson like 3 months ago, and it's fairly large. It includes some changes in fingerprinting and location identification. But what I really wanted to focus on today is around the templated components. So I know there's other back-end work that's involved in this larger unified report schema, and I believe a lot of that is already defined under this epic. I don't want to step on Tiago's toes or the rest of the team's toes, so Mihao and Savash, if you could help us with what the plan would look like and how we should move forward with taking this POC in regards to the templatized components, at least for this conversation, that would be my goal for this discussion. If there's other questions or comments about some of the other back-end work, Mihao, we can talk about it, especially if it's something that Matt can help clear up. But since we don't have a lot of representation from the rest of the team here, I was hoping that that would be a good focus.
I have one question.
Sure.
I keep hearing some noise.
It's Mihao.
It's me.
Okay.
It's the Zoom thing, Mihao. It's okay. It's that. Yeah, there it is.
Okay.
Hi,
okay,
Neil.
Perfect.
Everyone.
Hey, Neil. I'm going to just summarize what I just said. So the agenda, the meeting topic says unified report schema. Given the audience and the time and our priority right now, I want to focus on this templatized components for the generic report schema, which is much more front end heavy, which is I think why you came to join us, because there's a lot of considerations around the secure front end team here as well.
For sure. Thank you.
So before we get started, are there other questions at all? I'm going to go ahead and share my screen just to make sure we're all looking at the same thing. So overall summary of what we're doing here is available in the Epic. I think everyone's pretty aware of the fact that all the different scanners right now have their own schemas. The vulnerability details page has been updated to kind of display or react to those schemas in certain ways. And this is an approach for us to make that generic so that third-party scanners can introduce new schemas, so that our internal scanners, which hopefully someday will start to adhere to it, would have more flexibility. And this is the larger Epic. But Andy was nice enough to create a design issue for us just for the templatized components. So what we would display on the vulnerability details page. So I'm going to click into that. Before I move on, is there any questions about the bigger effort? Or Matt, anything that you want to add around the priority or usage or anything like that?
No, I mean, priority, this is something that's important. I think the urgency is, I'll say it's increasing. So one of the main benefits of this is a lot of the scanner teams, as they're trying to mature and advance their own areas of the product, are finding that they have need for more very use case specific information to be displayed on the vulnerability details pages, right? Like a fuzzing output might have like a crash dump of whatever happened in memory. SAST may want to put a snippet of the actual code where something is identified. Right now, we don't have a good way for them to do that other than each team basically hard coding in a conditional for, if it is a SAS scanner, then put this block of code in. It's not something that's going to be really scalable. So the generic report came from, I think, James in a roundabout way, but trying to address this, how can we allow each of the scanners to provide the details it needs without having the front end or the back end having to have really any logic around it, right? We're not making business decisions. It's just, we need to give them a repeatable way to display nicely formatted content. And so it's going to be up to the scanners to adopt and structure it. What Andy has got in the, actually, Lindsay, you want to open the little, or hold on, sorry, never mind, take it back. In the list, these were, I guess components is probably a good way to say that. So if you haven't looked deeply at the the POC report format, it basically allows for a recursive definition or a recursive structure. So you can make any combination of the component types to effectively output information however you need. And we're just going to try to display them. What Andy's design has done, if you wouldn't mind opening that, Lindsay, he has tried to account for each of those different components with one of these sections. I think there was some confusion that this is not what any given vulnerability detail page will look like. This is sort of a superset of if you just output everything. And we chatted about this yesterday. I think he's going to try to make an addition to this page and apply the component type labels on each one of the little pieces, just so it's really clear what we're looking at.
Oh, so it's part of the demo here, or the design mock here?
Yeah, exactly, right? Like modified data, that's not a component type, but a diff is, which is why he has got the diff component. So
right,
he would actually put the little label on the diff component.
So we have an issue under this epic around creating this schema. Like I said, there's a lot of this backend work that's already defined. So under the assumption that we've got a schema that is supporting this, and we can take a look at that schema if that's helpful today. If you haven't already, it might take me a little bit to navigate to it. The goal is to determine how, if we're moving forward, how to move forward to this and break down the issues. I've heard different things about what backend work is necessary on this. So Mihao, I'm hoping that you're able to help clarify some of that for us today, or in the near future, or Savash. Today, do we just get data points and then the front end determines the display of them? Or is there some sort of transformation that generates the markup on the back end and delivers that to the front end as part of an API call?
Okay, so the issue that we have for the backend, which is the one Mehmet created, this is the most flexible approach we can afford. Yes, this one. This is the most flexible approach we can employ in the database as we speak, because the details column, as long as it's a JSON B, it means we can insert any valid JSON into that, but the database is not going to verify that the JSON itself matches some sort of schema.
So we have validation considerations as well in a different backend issue here around enforcing schema validation for generic security reports. So would that satisfy what you're saying there, Mihao?
Yes, that would satisfy the schema validation part, and coming up with the unified schema is something that we have to do unless it was done and I'm not aware of it. But
right, and so that's where I think this proof of concept comes in, because James actually has something that was working, and he was able to show us with a schema that he had created that is part of this POC, the vulnerability details page displaying all of these different items. So there is the code behind all of that in here. It's not production ready. It doesn't have all the tests. He never built it with the intention that it would actually get merged into production, but there is a schema here. Whether we want to modify that or take it directly as it was in the POC, that's up to this team.
I think, I'm not sure about that, but we as threat management are not, well, we can modify the scanners, but I think the scanners fall under the secure section.
That's a great question. Let's talk about that. Matt, I think you might have a better response for that than me, kind of where this ownership and how we plan on having the scanner teams adhere to this.
Yes, so that's a great question. Think of this as sort of net new. If none of the scanners today adopt this, that's fine. This is going to live, it needs to live in parallel. We need to be able to consume the current common formats that each of the scanners output, and then this new unified schema type. So the long-term goal for this is, as the scanner teams are able, they would migrate their outputs into this new unified format, because it gives them that flexibility to sort of change the information and the presentation of the vulnerability details page, as long as they adhere to the schemas and it's, you know, it's valid, we don't have to do any work, which is where we want to go. On the flip side, I see this as being immediately useful for any third-party integrations. We have a limited number of official integrations today. Part of it is because it is kind of a challenge. As a vendor, I have to first figure out, like, okay, so I've got a, let's say, a dynamic analyzer. Now I have to go to the security documentation. I have to go find the specific format for my specific analyzer type, hope that it's got the fields that I need. And it's not an easy process. So this is going to make it a lot easier. So I kind of see third-party integrations, or if you haven't watched the brown bag session video link there, I highly encourage that. James does a really cool thing where he shows you can use the schema to just make your own custom tool. It takes him about an hour, and it's like a really single purpose command line utility that he basically wraps all this in. So this is a way to get more things into sort of our pipelines for security scanning.
Okay, so if we do not want to immediately ask the security team to adopt the unified schema, then we will have to do some additional work on the backend to transform the current schema employed by the scanners to somehow fit into that unified schema we just came up with. So we will have the old security scanners work with no changes, and we will have to somehow transform the old input into the new output on the backend. So we might have additional work in that case.
And that's where I think it would help to look at the code behind this, because I believe what you just described is how James approached that. This does currently support both the existing scanner schemas plus this new one in parallel. And I'm not 100% sure about whether it was doing a transformation or there was just the dual code in place.
I'd have to have a detailed look at that merge request, because last time I looked at it, I think it basically uses the new schema directly. It doesn't transform the existing raw metadata, but I might be wrong on that count.
I might be wrong too. I mean, I think the bottom line is I'd like that needs to be supported, what you just described, Michał, and whether we have code available to reference for it or we have to build it ourselves, that would need to be defined for the back end.
I'll have a quick look right now. And
okay. So if the goal out of this discussion is to try to at least determine some of the planning breakdown, you know, I would like to come out of this with a bullet pointed list of like, here is where or a plan to do this. Here is where the front end issues, what they would need to look like, and maybe here is some of what the missing back end issues would be. So Savash, would you be interested in doing this as a group right now rather than asking someone on the team to do it on their own?
No, it would be very helpful.
Have you had a chance yet to look at the POC or watch the brown bag video at all?
So I remember the DMR. It was a couple of months ago. I checked it.
It was a while ago.
Yeah, it was a while ago. I have some knowledge on the topic.
Do you have any questions in mind that we should clear up going into this?
None so far.
Okay. So we have this larger epic, which I think is where we'd create the sub issues. But I think for right now, I'll just create a list in the comments of the design issue. You know, the big outstanding question in my head is still, and I don't know if it was answered just now, where the styles are applied today. Is that all done on the front end, or is that markup generated on the back end today to take the schema and turn it into the markup for the vulnerability details page?
It's all done in the front end part.
That's what I thought, but I wasn't sure. So do you have an idea of where we would start as far as these issues go?
So I think first we need to understand so if we look at the design that Andy prepared, there are some fields there. We need to understand which fields we want to display and probably create a component for each of them. so that dynamically they can be displayed. Because today we don't have these components. We will need to prepare them. So that will be the first starting point, at least for the front end.
And Savash,
So,
when I had talked to Andy about this, he said he pretty much put this together almost entirely with existing GitLab styles for things. So there should be both like the diff, that's an existing component, like on the MR, and many of the other styles are things he's just pulled from our UI. So
yeah, that's perfectly fine. It's just that we need to map that. So for instance, if we receive a JSON and that it says, okay, display the diff, we need to create some mapper that says, okay, if you receive this kind of field, then display the diff component. So probably we will need some wrappers around to pass data in it, to feed data in the components. So that's my guess, at least. But if we have all these components already prepared, that should decrease the amount of work that we need to do.
So if there were cases where there wasn't one, there would be some additional development there. And that would be identified from this first issue or the first bullet point that I just wrote down. They seem pretty standard. I don't think there's anything that we're trying to display here that's really, out of the box new, but we should leave the possibility open that we might have to put some custom code around that.
So the thing is, for instance, if we have this component, I think we will need to work closely with the backend so that they know what properties this component takes, and they need to prepare the JSON accordingly to decrease the amount of work that we need to do in the front end, like to map them or to create these wrappers. So I think the first bullet point, identifying the components, this can be done together with the backend. So if the JSON is compatible with these components, it's much easier to proceed. That's what I meant.
And some of this, again, this goes back to having the validation. So once we do this once and we are confident that we've got the right properties associated with each element or component, that there's validation in place to make sure that we don't have to handle a whole bunch of weird edge cases of things not being as we expect.
I think the validation needs to happen in the backend.
Right. And again, there's a separate issue already today around schema validation. So I think this is just, during that development, making sure that we've defined, like, just to repeat what you said, that we've defined all the properties that are required to display the element as the design expects it, which could result in changes to what that schema looks like. Okay.
So I have good news. I took a look at the total changes in the proof of concept merge request by James, and the backend changes in this proof of concept are minimal. He exposes 2 additional fields in addition to what we currently expose in the helper, which means that this proof of concept consumes what we currently export from the backend, but I'd like a proper front-end opinion on how viable the code is, because I don't consider myself versed enough to say this is good code or this code is going to require much more work. But backend-wise, the changes are minimal. So this proof of concept allows us to keep using the existing schema without changing anything. And
introducing this new generic schema alongside it.
We could introduce that alongside it.
Okay, so your point around the quality of the front end code, I don't think we were ever intending to just take the code as developed by James, but there's the potential, right? I mean, obviously, if he wrote some great code, we don't want to throw it away.
Yeah, I basically I am not doing any assessment because I don't feel competent enough to do that. So I feel we could reuse that.
And looking at the back-end code, can you identify any other issues that we would need to create outside of what's already been created here by Mehmet?
No. With regards to the unified schema, I don't see any issues. But I think we could reuse that. And looking at the back-end code, can you identify any other issues that we would need to create outside of what's already been created here by Mehmet? No. With regards to the unified schema, I don't see any issues.
Okay.
report schema, what Mehmet did is basically the most flexible approach we can employ in this case. So it makes perfect sense, this one.
Excellent.
The question is, how do we structure the schema in a way that it requires no or minimal transformations for the front end to display?
Okay, and that goes back to
The unified
the goal.
schema design.
Yeah, so that goes back to what we're trying to define right now. So
Yes.
no, that's perfect. So great. That's great news. Thank you. Yeah. So what you just described, does that make sense to make a bullet point here, Savash, around that transformation? Or is that inherently part of this first item? Like, do we need a separate issue around the
sorry,
mapping?
Lucy, you got cut off. Can you please repeat your question?
So I'm curious if the transformation of the schema data types to the UI data types, I mean, and is that handled here in this first bullet point, or is this just the identification? Like, we've identified that the components are out there. Should we have a separate implementation issue around that transformation or mapping?
That's a good question. So first, I think we need, first we need to understand which fields we want to populate. That's the first step. The second step will be to so I was checking the POC right now, the front end code. There are a lot of front end changes. That it was not what I was expecting. At least it was not what I had in mind with this issue, because what I had in mind was that we have the amount of work that we deliver. It's mostly in the JSON. So the JSON knows a bit. So it provides also information on the UI components. But what I see here is that we have a lot of front-end code delivered. That was not my expectation. So I was kind of confused. But the thing is, so once we have the JSON, the schema ready, the next step should be just simply write those wrappers, or if we need any wrapper, hopefully not, which maps the JSON to the UI components. So that's probably the second step. So the first step would be identifying the components, understand what we have today, and build the JSON schema according to that. The second step would be to implement those components, the missing ones, and if we have any, and then create the mapper.
Okay.
If that's clear. I think I was confused while I spoke a bit. So, but
my suggestion for the unified schema is that it's not developed with the UI front-end consumption in mind. Because I expect if we do that having the front-end in mind, the unified schema, then I expect that at some point it would turn out that the people integrating tools with our unified schema have a different requirements than the front end has to consume them. So ideally, we have the schema developed with the scanners in mind and structured in such a way that it's easy to write a scanner conforming to the schema, and we would ingest that schema in the backend, and we would transform the input schema from the scanner on the backend, transformed into a way that can be parsed by the front end in an easy way. So ideally, all the hard computation would take place on the backend, and we would have a schema that's designed with the scanners in mind, not with the front end in mind.
You're right. You're right. I think the UI logic shouldn't. Sorry, that was my mistake. So how I imagine this is that the backend provides, for instance, a JSON schema could look like this. There's a type field. It says diff, and then there's the data, which gives the diff data, for instance. And then we have a mapper around it, and once we parse the JSON, we see that the type, whenever the type is the diff, we use a diff component for that, and we inject the data. So we definitely need a mapper for that. But I was imagining this to be dynamic, not like I couldn't check the code in detail, but I saw that there was a lot of front-end changes. So that was not my expectation. My expectation was to build a simple wrapper, a mapper function, which basically parses the JSON data and then displays the components in a for loop, for instance. So if this is doable, I think it's very good.
Yeah, we will essentially end up with two schemas: one for the scanners, the unified scanner schema, and a front-end schema, which will help front-end engineers write simpler code to display it in a way that we want.
Yeah.
So Miha, are you saying that? Go ahead, Matt.
I was just going to say, I think it's worth pointing out that while the POC, I think, was very helpful for James to sort of articulate this idea, don't feel attached to anything he has written necessarily. I think, Miha, your point about making something the scanners can output is, I agree, is much more important. And then we're just sort of allowing them to adjust the way that they create that output if they would like to see something different in our UI, just sort of ordering of operations. But yeah, Savash, if you're seeing a lot of code in a place that you don't expect it for the front end stuff, we're not married to that. We can get rid of that code and start from scratch.
Yeah, I would need to check in detail, because I remember I checked that a few months ago, and then next time I checked was yesterday and today. I would need to check it in detail and understand again what it does exactly. But what I had in mind was simply, you know, a function which iterates, which parses the data and then displays dynamic components. So that was, maybe we can also add it as an issue to investigate the POC if that's something we would like to go ahead, or exactly.
So basically, at this point, I see like three high-level tasks. The first one is to come up with a unified report with the detail, with how to come up with the schema for the unified report, for scanner report. The second one would be for front-end engineers to come up with a desired schema of what backend should give them to display the report in the vulnerability details section. And the third high-level task is to create backend code that would transform the unified security scanner schema into the front-end schema. So that would be three high-level tasks we currently have to deal with.
Exactly. And one thing, for instance, in the front end, those components, the ones that are written on top of on an MR description, are those the ones that will be used for displaying the JSON schema? I think there was a list of.
Yeah, so those are the ones that that James had called out, and after I was actually discussing this with him a couple of months ago, like the Markdown one was one that I thought would be really helpful to add. So that's what's in there now. If there are certain things that maybe don't make as much sense, or you think some of the components might be better combined or split apart, that's open for discussion as well.
Okay, perfect. And so what I would do, for instance, here, I would go one by one through this list, understand what data these components require, and then build or ask the backend to provide the specific data based on that. So so it's in line with what Michał said. First, the backend creates, defines the JSON, the fields that are needed. Then we collaborate with the backend. We tell them what kind of data and we need, and then we start building it. I think the bulk, the great amount of work here is on creating the JSON schema. The rest, I hope, should be just some manual work.
And apologies, Lindsay, I apparently have a meeting with Scott and the rest of the secure PM team that I didn't see until just now, so I gotta hop off. But
thanks for coming.
Hit me up on Slack if you need me to answer anything.
Will do. So we already have an issue under this epic around the JSON schema. I know that that was already create generic security report schema. It sounds like we need to create another one for the front end display schema based on what you're saying. Is that correct?
I'm not sure if we need a schema. We just need a mapper. So we need to parse the JSON, and then we, since this is going to be dynamic, we need a for loop probably, which iterates through the fields and then displays what component we need. So
this really did kind of capture it before. This, what we said previously. This is really the front end, what you're describing here.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. I don't think the transformation that you described, Michał, has already been captured.
So ideally what I had in mind is that front-end engineers in Java come up with a desired JSON they get from the backend. So if I can ingest any kind of schema I want in the backend because the JSON B column allows me to just dump a JSON into this column and be done with it. But ideally, I imagine that the JSON schema desired by the security scanner creators will be different from the schema desired by the front-end engineers. So ideally, we at the backend would need a desired schema from the front-end engineers so we can transform the scanner output to the desired schema by the front-end team so they have easier time displaying the details. And the unified security schema will need to be discussed in detail with the secure section since they are mostly responsible for the scanners, and I kind of don't want us to come up and say, hey, we came up with this and can you use that schema? I think that,
no, and that's a good point. Getting input from others in secure will definitely be a step. Keep in mind, since we're going to continue to support the existing schemas, we're not asking them to change anything right away. We should make it as compatible so that they would want to adopt the schema as possible and make whatever plans for that early. But if we don't,
they should make the changes right away, but we need to you know what I mean. We need their input on how the schema should look like, so they are more likely to adopt it in the nearest future, or sooner or later than later. Sorry.
I think it's a good point. I think we should come up with what we think it should look like and then get their input versus going through any kind of big collaborative.
If we follow this, then there will be one additional backend task, which is basically transforming the details JSON B column from the unified scanner schema to the schema desired by the front-end team. So we will have one additional issue for the backend.
So that's what I was trying to say here. I might not have said it very well. Is that?
Yeah. That point makes sense. That point makes sense.
Okay. So again, this one is already captured. This is already in this issue. So I'm going to just link to that there.
Yep.
So it sounds like we need, go ahead.
While it's a backend issue to create the JSON schema, I think we need to collaborate closely with so it's also a front-end issue because we need to specify, as Michał said, we need to specify what fields we need.
I even go as far as maybe this is the wrong wording, but I dump it onto the front-end team so that you basically come up with the most convenient.
Could also be, yeah.
Most convenient form of the schema for you to parse, for you to ingest, and tell us exactly what you want. Since I can transform the data any kind I want, but we want ideally make it for the front end to do the least work possible.
I think this might be a separate issue then. So you're talking about there's the generic security report schema, and this is the one that we want the secure team to agree on.
Yes. Yes.
Is the schema that you're talking about now the front end schema that's expected? Do we need a second issue around that front end schema then? Okay. Yes.
Ideally,
So
front-end engineers would tell us in what format, in what schema they want the data to be in, so they can do the least amount of work possible on the front end.
so
Because
that's not already this one then.
So I think, Lindsay, it's like this.
Oh, it
So
is.
there is the defined JSON schema. I think that's breakdown
It's
into
already
two issues.
covered.
The first one is that the front end does the investigation and tells the backend what fields they want.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Michał. And then, which is a blocker for the backend issue to create the JSON. So first, the backend needs input from the front end so that they can start writing the JSON schema.
Exactly.
I think that's okay.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I don't know if we need to split that into separate issues, at least right now. I mean, we try to avoid having front end, back end issues that have to move independently through the pipeline, but it would be hard to split this one, right?
Yeah, Lindsay, you're writing the last bullet point captures what we will have to do after the front end investigation is completed.
Sorry, can you say that one more time?
Yeah, the BE build schema based on and front end decision is exactly the last
Okay.
bullet point you have there. So
Okay, I thought there was maybe some other coder on that, so that's not the case.
That captures the idea
Okay.
the best. I mean, we will be just transforming the one from one schema to the other schema, and in the process we will get two different schemas, but one is optimized towards integrating new scanners, and the second one will be optimized towards front end display.
I'm confused here when you say
I am
schemas.
too. I am too. I thought I understood, and then I'm off again a little bit. So let me just try once. So there is the schema that we expect the scanners to give us.
Yes.
And that
we
needs
put that
to
into
get
the database.
And that needs to get contribution from the front end just to make sure that there's the expected data from those scanners. No?
No.
Okay.
The front end team is to tell us at the back end what kind of fields would they need to display the components. So I mean, what Savage said kind of made sense to me. Like, if the scanner output is like, okay, so here is a div, then maybe for the front end schema would need that information that the type is div, and there is another key with the contents of the div, and then they can iterate through all the things that we have in the front end schema. And if this component is a div, then you can use the data to display a div component. So it's going to be generated on the fly. And if you have any additional components created at a later date, then we will need minimal changes. I can write up an example in a second if you give me later on.
That'd be good. Go ahead, Swash.
Okay.
Do I understand this correctly? So you will have one schema for the backend, and then you will have something that transforms that schema into what the front end desires.
Exactly.
And you will send that back to us.
Yep.
Okay, so the front end will never know about the schema that is in the backend, the one that you use.
Ideally, you shouldn't know about it.
We shouldn't, right?
Yeah, ideally you shouldn't know any details about the scanner schema, because if we force you to consume the scanner schema, then we will create a dependency between what frontend expects and what the scanner should provide. While I think that the scanner schema should be geared towards integrating new scanners, and the frontend schema should be different, and it shouldn't depend on what scanners provide. I mean, just the data structure.
Yeah, you will store the raw data, for instance, let's call it the raw data in the database, the ones that generated from the scanners, and then once the front end asks it, you will take that data, you will massage it, and then you will serve it to us, right? So that's why you need two schemas.
Yes, we will serve it in the format that you on the front end want. So it's easier for you to. So you have to do less transformations on the front end because they are always time consuming, and I imagine if we design that prudently, then we will probably be able to add new component types without changing much code later on. If we like say extract a new component, let's, I don't know, maybe register details. And if we do that in the way that you initially suggested, which by which I mean there is a type key which will tell you what kind of component should we display. Then if we introduce a new component, then you will just have to create the new component and do nothing else.
Okay, I thought that you would store into the database the one that will be served to the front end, but that's not gonna be the case.
We could do that if we determine that this is a performance bottleneck at some point. This is an option. This is an option, but
maybe we can investigate that.
Yeah, in order to explore that option, we need to first like get the proof of concept done and see if this is an actual performance problem.
Is that clear now, Lindsay?
It's more clear, but what I'm still sort of missing is, do we need front-end contribution on the generic report schema that's captured here? I don't think so. I think what you're saying is that the second display schema is where you need the front end.
Yes.
And that this is fine as it is. And this is what you'd be reviewing with the secure team and the scanner teams to make sure that it meets their needs.
Exactly.
Okay. So I get that. So, and I think that's this, I think that's this basically, right? So we've got that covered.
Yep.
I feel like we're missing something in the front end and developing, and maybe that's this, Savash, developing what that display schema looks like. Would that be represented by this item that I have highlighted here?
I guess so.
Or need to be broken down more or something. I mean, I just want to get these out into something that can start being refined.
I like the terms you use, the generic report and then the display report, or the generic scheme and then the display scheme. So maybe the first one is the generic scheme, and then the second one, identify GitLab UI component, the second bullet point, it's the display scheme, which Michał was mentioning, like the ones that's going to be served to the front end.
Display schema seems really super generic. Is it vulnerability details display schema? Is it?
Yep.
Yeah, maybe we should be careful with the terms because they stick around and then
they do.
Yeah.
I was having this conversation with someone yesterday. Okay, so the first one, the generic report schema, is what we're talking about here. The definition of this vulnerability details display schema. Is that its own issue then, Savash, that we should create? And it's not the mapping of that schema to the UI components. That should be its own distinct effort. Okay.
Exactly.
And whether that happens before or not, it doesn't really, so define.
So one should be define the schema. The other issue should be implement the schema.
And that's backend.
Yes. But also in the front end, parse that schema into UI components. So one is give the backend what they want so that they can prepare the schema. And then the second one is parsing it in the front end. So we have two front end issues.
Okay, so is this the parsing then, I think? The one that I had right here?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
We can put it that way.
Okay. So I currently see the need for three more issues, or three new issues around the front end defining the display schema, the back end developing that display schema, right? Generating it. And then the third one is that mapping or the front end transformation that you just described.
Yes.
Does that sound right?
I think chronologically, the first one should be define JSON schema. The second one should be front-end define vulnerability details display schema. And then the third one should be backend generate expected vulnerability details display schema. And then the fourth one should be front-end.
The order, yes, gotcha. Yeah. So we will do them in the right order, but that's what you're saying right there then. Once we put them in the issues, you guys can move them around. So, you know, and we can create dependencies, you know, we can mark something as blocked as necessary. I feel like this is something that we'll probably need to break down a lot more, especially given some of the more complicated, like the diff component and things like that, that might be harder to develop. Like that could be huge right there.
That could be an epic, this one, for instance. So it has multiple sub issues.
We can have epics inside the epics.
We can totally have epics inside epics, but there's
Then we
a
will have
5. There's
Yeah,
a
then I
5
guess
layer.
we will have an epic inside an epic, basically.
Let's start it as an issue. We can convert it to an epic as we go through. Again, that limitation of 5 epics, we've hit that a lot, especially if you look at the hierarchy of like the maturity definition epics. This could turn into an epic.
Maybe this could be an issue which has multiple MRs.
That's a thought too. So that can be part of the refinements. You know, I don't think we need to decide that here. So can we think of anything else that and I'm happy to create these implementation issues, but I'm going to assign them off to you guys for refinement and putting more details on them. I've already asked Savash to create a lot of implementation issues in a different area, so I don't want to pile this all on him. Is there anything else that you guys can think of though?
So the only thing that I would change here is that the front end identify GitLab UI component. I think the identification process goes into the second issue. This one is just the implementation of the mapper. Yeah, maybe you can just remove that as well. Working with Bandisher, that's person JSON.
I think that was up here.
That's also exactly needs to go. Because that's
the
third
second.
bullet
That's the
point.
second one, right? That's this one, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. That one. Yeah. I think this is exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Well, this is at least a good start. We might identify more work that needs to be, you know, or issues that need to be created off of this. But I will get these created today. Based on this conversation, I am going to assign them off to you two for refinement. And I'll also share the video. So if anyone else wants any insight into how we got to these. My hope was to be able to loop back around and put some notes in the agenda. But I think since we've created this list of issues, that's kind of, that was my goal of this discussion. So yay, succeeded.
You look confused a bit. Or
I always look confused. That's just me. I'm not confused. I was expecting there to be a lot more issues coming out of this, but I think that this is really where they live. And I think that'll come out of some of this refinement. So I'm not confused. I just want to make sure that you guys are comfortable with this. I mean, are you confused?
I love how this makes sense to me.
Okay.
This makes sense to me as well.
Good.
What I'm unsure is whether we need a synchronous meeting with secure team or we can do that asynchronously, but yeah, that's up for the debate.
Yeah, and I think that's a good thing. Would you mind adding a comment, Mihao, to this issue? Because that's what this is representing. And
Yeah,
it's in
yep.
13.7.
Yeah,
And I know, I'm happy that Neil joined, but I think this is much bigger than just sharing it with Neil. So we'll want to make sure that like Thomas and Olivier and, you know, the rest of the secure scanner teams are filled in.
Yeah, I'll make sure that they have seen that and we got their opinion on how the schema should be structured.
And the thing that we want to make really clear to everyone, we don't want to cause confusion saying that they're going to need to make updates right away to use this schema. You know, we're not asking anyone to change their current schemas. We just want to make sure that we're building something that will meet their needs if they do decide. I mean, who knows? One of these scanners could decide that they want to embrace one of these new elements, and then we say, hey, you got to switch over and use the generic report schema. We want that to be as easy as possible, right? All right. Okay. Thank you very much for your time. I'm going to stop sharing, and I think we're done. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Good work.
Bye.
Bye.